and they're going to call you out if it happens.
We will.
If you have never been here before, you are at the Patagonia Creative Arts Association / Tin Shed Theater. We are a non-profit that specializes in arts education. Our primary focus is children, but we also offer these types of events for all the folks that don't rate as children. I'm really happy to have you all here. If you feel so compelled to and feel like you enjoyed your time here and want to see things like this happen again and again and again, don't forget to stop by the donation bucket outside, and I'm going to go ahead and hand this off to, oh wait, there's one more thing. If you haven't found where the bathroom is, it's outside here to the left. There's an exit right there if the ceiling falls down upon us, and also that's the closest way out. All right?
Thanks, Christina. Well, as everybody may know, I'm Lars. Well, last night we got to, Todd calls me up, says let's go to the Wagon Wheel to meet, because I never met him. And we decided, Todd said let's meet at 5:31. And all of you guys who know Jim know what that means, kind of. So, what was fun? We got there. I wasn't sure what's going on. A bunch of friends joined us. We started talking old times, old stories, and everything. And I realized that Todd is a great observer. He's a quick wit. He's a great sport. And his book made me realize how much I miss Jim. And I just want to, my pleasure is to introduce Todd Goddard.
Thank you for that, Lars. Really, it's an absolute honor to be up here with Lars, to be doing this with the Patagonia Public Library, and it's just such an honor to be in Patagonia. I feel humbled to be here. I know many of you, most of you knew Jim Harrison in some way, shape, or form, and so this is Harrison country, and so it's a real honor to be here. So thank you for coming out. Really.
Well, the first question I was going to ask you was, why Jim?
Well, okay, yeah. Why Jim? I was first introduced to Legends of the Fall in college. Someone just handed it to me and said, "You got to read this." And so I loved it. I mean, I just was taken by it and went and read all of Jim's fiction. Really, just went back to the beginning, went back to Wolfe and read my way through Jim's fiction up until that point, and then turned to his poetry and turned to his nonfiction, and just completely absorbed myself in it. And then whenever a new book would come out, I would be on it. And I had studied at New York University under some biographers who were mentors to me, and so I also knew I wanted to write a biography at some point. And when I finally got myself into a position to be able to write one, I remembered reading that Jim's collected papers had been all gathered up and placed at Grand Valley State University, which is outside Grand Rapids, Michigan. And I remember thinking at the time when I was reading that article, I said, Jim Harrison, that's the subject, that's the biography. And but I wasn't, at that time I couldn't do it, and so when I finally could do it, I went back, sort of circled back, and reached out to Jim's daughter, Jamie Harrison, and sent her an email and said who I was and what I wanted to do and why. And Jamie said, let me talk to the family, and got right back to me and said, let's proceed slowly. And that set things in motion. But for me, Jim was really an organic sort of decision for me. I know other biographers puzzle over their subjects of their books, agonize even, and to a great extent for me it was just like a lightning bolt. I was just like, if no one's doing this, and even if someone is doing it, I ain't gonna do it anyway. And so it was just, I just knew I thought he'd be a fantastic biographical subject, and I think he was and is.
Well, as I was reading the book, I just kept reading passages. I had the library edition, so I couldn't highlight it, but I did anyway. Could you read a couple?
Yeah. I thought I'd start with start at the beginning, and for my book, that means a moment in 2003 when Jim flies off to France, goes to a restaurant outside or in Vézelay, France, for a 37-course lunch, which you might have heard about. He wrote an article, a really big lunch for the New Yorker magazine. And it's become, a famous, if infamous event in Jim Harrison's life. And so the book begins there, in fact. And so it comes from the chapter, The Legend of Little Jimmy. And it begins on a cool, misty morning in November 2003. Jim Harrison paced the gardens of a manor house in the medieval village of Saint-Père-sous-Vézelay in Burgundy, anticipating the beginning of a 37-course lunch. Now, I don't know if this is going to make you all hungry or not hungry. It could go either way, depending on your preference and appetite. Life is a near-death experience, it later writes, and our devious minds will do anything to make it interesting. Despite being 65 years old and suffering from painful bouts of gout, hypertension, and kidney stones, he'd soon add chronic shingles, post-herpetic neuralgia, type 2 diabetes, spondylolisthesis, spinal stenosis, and hip arthritis to the list. Jim had traveled from his home in Livingston, Montana, to Paris 2 weeks earlier. Devouring time, a phrase from a poem Jim liked to quote, would eventually do its worst. At noon that day, 12 invited attendees crowded into the Michelin-starred restaurant of Marc Minot, L'Espérance. The grounds included the restaurant and the hotel, a small gift shop, and park-like gardens of flowers and herbs crisscrossed by little streams and walking paths. The restaurant's dining room overlooked the gardens, and that morning it had been amply appointed with fresh flowers. It lay just a few miles from Vézelay's cobblestone streets and its Benedictine monastery, now the Basilica of Sainte-Marie-Madeleine. Jim thought the village and the cathedral the loveliest in France. The attendees included Jim's friends, Guy de la Valdaine, a French count, and restaurateur and writer Peter Lewis, plus a mix of gourmands and chefs, mostly French. The organizer of the event was Jim's friend, Gérard Oberlé, an unquestionable genius, Jim thought him, book dealer, writer, and scholar of French food, who resided in a manor house in nearby Nivernais. For this hours-long meal, Oberlé crafted a menu drawn from 17 cookbooks published between 1654 and 1823. As the diners filed in, Chef Minot, a brilliant but tempestuous French chef of the old school, stood by wearing a crisp white uniform with a blue apron. His job and that of his wife, Françoise, along with 39 members of the staff, was to keep the 37 courses coming throughout the day. The first service of the lunch began with Minot exclaiming simply, "Courage," or courage, as Jim would write, followed by a grand assortment of nose-to-tail dishes. Tartines of foie gras with truffles and lard, a velvet cream of squab with cucumbers served with cock-crest fritters, oysters and cream of camembert on toast, a jellied loaf of poultry on sorrel cream, a tart of calf's brain with shelled peas, and an omelet of sea urchin. Later came a stew of suckling pig, a warm terrine of hare with preserved plums, and a poached eel with chicken wing tips and testicles in a pool of tarragon butter. Courage indeed. A selection of celebrated French wines, Jim would note, rained down on us as if from the world's best garden sprinkler. By one account, 19 different bottles. But of course, Jim would change the account of bottles pretty much in every saying, so who knows how many actual bottles of wine they drank. Before departing Montana, Jim had queried editor Deborah Treisman at the New Yorker about the possibility of a write-up for the magazine. "I'm going again to France tomorrow, and one of my duties is to attend a 37-course lunch. Yes, 37, of 17th and 18th century food down in the country. I've developed a pretty good access there to aspects of their culture that don't typically appear in the New Yorker. Of course, the approach would be comic. If she didn't want the story, he wouldn't bother taking notes, vaguely thinking that a doctor should be in attendance." Treisman was interested and agreed with Jim's later concerns, hoping afterward that he'd survived the meal, and thought it a thrill to have the piece in the issue. The result, a really big lunch, was included in the magazine's September 6, 2004 issue, and would earn a certain notoriety, as one critic put it, for its unapologetic description of excess, about which Jim remained thoroughly unrepentant. His defense, what little there was, relied mostly and characteristically on humor. While the lunch likely cost as much as a new Volvo station wagon, none of us 12 disciples of gourmandise wanted a Volvo. We wanted only lunch, and since lunch lasted approximately 11 hours, we saved money by not having to buy dinner. It's a long road from a childhood in rural Michigan to being the sort of man who gets invited to a 37-course lunch, Jim would write in The New Yorker, though he'd return again and again in its narrative to his childhood memories, as if pausing to measure the distance he had traveled. He took pride in his Midwestern upbringing, and it affected him permanently. He'd recall his astonishment as a young boy growing up in northern Michigan, the limitless appetites of his grandfather's pigs, and the gospel assumption in the Calvinist Midwest that we eat to live, not live to eat. In describing a tort of pig's noses once prepared for him by Oberle, he observed how such food is usually only for the extremely curious or those with an agricultural background. Jim was both. He remembered his grandmother's boiling pig's heads with herbs and onions to make a head cheese of the cheek, tongue, and neck meat, a family specialty worthy of Oberle's menu. As a private joke, Oberle had arranged to have Minot serve fresh Baltic herring with mayonnaise, a staple food of Jim's Swedish relatives, because everyone knew that Jim had relished it since age 2. As for his mother, Jim informed the reader she was a Swedish Lutheran who liked to ask her 5 children, "What have you accomplished today?" If I'd told her I've eaten 37 courses and drunk 13 wines, I would have been cast into outer darkness. But then this was the Iron Mom who also said, with a tiny smile, in reference to my life's work, "You've made quite a living out of your fibs." If his mother's comment seems barbed, she wasn't entirely wrong. At the time of his death in 2016, Jim counted over 30 books of fiction, nonfiction, and poetry to his name. He had traveled a very long road indeed.
I've been reading this book the last week, and I had to take a couple people to the airport, and I didn't want to stop reading it, so when I take them to the airport, I'd make them read the book. They're like, "Dude, I'm getting car sick." I'm like, "Just one more paragraph."
I think that should maybe be a feature of all Uber and Lyft rides, is a Jim Harrison book in the back.
I like that. I like that.
Yeah.
Is there anything else you want to read?
I think, I could read more, or whatever. Well, maybe we'll talk a little bit and revisit it. Yeah.
Well, one of my wonders about when you're starting to research, you're writing about somebody that's just recently passed. How do you deal with, you're doing all this research and you're writing all this stuff, and a friend of yours comes and goes, "Hey, dude, that wasn't true. This is how it really happened."
That happens to me all the time. Everybody, a lot of you, here in Patagonia, for instance, I'm almost expecting it afterward. You got this wrong or something. But I get it in Michigan, of course, and I get it in Montana, and I'll probably get it here. Half kidding, but half not. I've had people come up to me and say, "I don't know." I don't know, writing about somebody who, Jim's not Thomas Jefferson, he's not some distant figure, right? And so a lot of people there's a very kind of living memory of Jim. And living relatives and family members, and so for me, I studied 19th century American literature in graduate school, and I was always thinking and writing about people, there weren't anybody who knew those characters, right, around anymore, and so it was a challenge and an honor and sometimes a tightrope walk to just. To get people. I think interviewing people who knew Jim was always involved trust, and it involved getting to know people in Jim's circles, getting to know his family members, and getting them it's trust, getting them comfortable enough around me and with me and what I was doing to open up and share stories with me. And in the writing of the book, I definitely erred 100% on the side of being as candid and truthful as I could possibly be and tell Jim's full story. But of course, people are impacted by that story, and sort of walking that tightrope between being as full and honest about who Jim Harrison was, who I think he was, and trying to represent him in the book, but also sort of just being conscious and mindful of the people who were still living in his life and who loved him and were very close to him. And so it's a delicate process, I think.
Well, last night we were at the bar, and everyone was telling stories and these great things and these simple things. Do you find that if you go to Michigan, if you're in Montana, you find the same kind of answers to some of your questions?
Answers to like what?
Like when we're telling you, he did this, he did this. Well, did he do that? Was he different than when he was here? And some of us have stories that we can't tell today.
Well, what I've found in doing research, and I did well over 100 interviews for this book, is that everybody knows Jim Harrison in different ways. Right? Everybody knows different sides of Jim. One of the things that I thought made Jim such a good biographical subject was that he's so multifaceted. He's a hunter and fisher, he's a food writer and a gourmand, and a wine enthusiast. He's a poet, he's a novelist, novellist, screenwriter, so he has this whole Hollywood life that goes on. He had a life in New York that was very vibrant. And all of the people who I'm interviewing know him, different facets of him, and know him in different ways. There are childhood friends who know him in very specific ways. His agent, Bob Dattila, who I hope we get a chance to talk to about today because he's such a colorful character, knew, really the business side of Jim. And he knew Jim in Hollywood, and he knew Jim in New York, but he didn't know other facets of Jim's life. And so, and sometimes these stories, these interviews with people and stories they tell overlap, but often they're sort of they're in their lanes, and obviously his daughter and family know him in different ways too. So for me, it was a big collage of interviews for me that came together to create this sort of composite of Jim Harrison.
I kept asking myself last night as you were telling all these stories, had Jim been with us last night, what would you have asked him?
Yeah, that's a great question. Well, okay. I go back and forth on this question. One would be, what'd you think of the book? And I might run. Or, but I think that would be the question. And otherwise, I honestly don't think